So thank you for having me here. So listening to all the presentations so far, I feel like an outsider of the system because I'm not coming from the banking industry. I'm coming from the software industry, so slideware are not my expertise, more software. But I want to talk about a very different topic, about a kind of a new asset class. And before I do this, I have to go a little bit back in history to see where we're coming from. I saw a lot of talks saying something like, we are so early and we are just getting started in the first kind of transactions. I have to absolutely disagree. We are here since a very long time. We have done this, we have settled billions. So this is not a new system. This is also not a new technology now. So Bitcoin is 2008. I got into Bitcoin in 2013. I was part of the team developing Ethereum in 2014, so building the EVM. And so happy to see so many people using the EVM today. It's always a nice thing as a developer seeing the software being used. But at the core of it was always digital ownership. So Bitcoin was the first kind of digital ownership. Then Ethereum came along, and I have this little code snippet here from the white paper, where in 4 lines of code he implemented a token which could stand for anything. A little bit later came the ERC20 token standard because we recognized that all those wallets using it needs a standardized interface, so it becomes truly interoperable, which is also, by the way, one of the most important features of Web3 is composability and interoperability. That's why private chains are more or less useless for many of those cases. Of course for permissions, but they don't give you access to this DeFi ecosystem, which is actually the big thing happening right now. So what was happening? So I was the author of the DAO. Some of you have been around and maybe saw what was happening in 2016. So the DAO was a project which was extremely radical and a decentralized autonomous organization. The DAO raised 162 million at the time, which was the largest crowdfunding ever since then, 2016. We had about 20,000 different addresses investing, of course, completely anonymous, because on a blockchain you don't know who is who. We had a lot of press, and it was a very exciting time. It was kind of the first really big token, except of virtual currencies like Bitcoin and Ether. So if you see the distribution, we had about, it was 23,000 something token holders, and it was fairly good distributed. Some bigger ones, but none of them had more, I think, than 7% or so. So it was still nicely distributed. So this was a very radical experiment we were doing. Those who know the story know that we failed. So there's this nice quote, you never know how far you can go until you've gone too far. So with the DAO, we were way too early in 2016. There was a bug in the smart contract, which led to a hacker trying to get $50 million, which then, after a long time, and DAO wars, and we hacked back, and long story, we sold it in the hard fork of the Ethereum chain, making everybody whole again. So this topic today is not the DAO, but I just want to give you a bit of perspective. Tokenization is a very old topic, and we have thought about this since a long time and did a lot of things and learned a lot of things. This was just more a security failure. But what happened after the DAO? So this little bar in the very beginning in 2016, this was the DAO with the $166 million. But after that, we saw the ICO hype. So people raising funds, issuing a token, it was billions of dollars being raised. Unfortunately, most of the projects were scams, really bad projects, no due diligence. People lost a lot of money because of frauds, no regulation whatsoever. So this was kind of the Wild West of the crypto days. And this now became, we get awareness by lawyers, regulators, and they come looking at what are they doing there. We kind of had our playground, so to say, but it became real. It was kind of real money. In the beginning, it was just funny digital internet money, and now it became kind of real money because the value was going up. So after that, they still wanted to raise funds, and so let's call it security tokens, let's try to make them legal somehow. So let's somehow call our lawyers, let's tell them, how can we do this legal? And well, then they started with those Switzerland foundations, and some of you have known, most of them are not in Germany, they go somewhere else. And yes, they are considered security, so you have to do KYC. And almost none of them registered with the SEC, but at least they tried technically to not include Americans, although most through a VPN could still participate in those ICOs. So now we had this crazy phase of some utility tokens, some security tokens, and it was a lot of uncertainty. And if you look now in Germany, actually a lot of the crypto space is in Germany, a lot of the founders and those who wanted to raise funds as well. And they had this uncertainty about how to do this, where to do this, how to do this legally. And this is not a topic usually founders want to spend most of their time on. But I think one thing which is still, I'm very skeptical when listening to all those discussions, is a bit wrong in their thinking, is they try to fit a token onto the existing model. I very much like this quote by Buckminster Fuller, which is kind of the philosophy of everything we did so far in the Ethereum space, which is you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So think about this when you think about security tokens. Most of the security tokens, not all, there are many good ones and there's exceptions, and I know there's so many projects I cannot know all of them. They just leave the system as is, the same kind of security or Wertpapier, and just put a token on top. Which means you sign a contract and you have this investment contract, and someone gets the security and he also gets the token. Meaning you have to create a wallet, all the hassle around it, but you actually change not much in the system at the core. So that's why it's not an actual big benefit. It's sometimes a little bit optimization in cost. Yes, you reduce the value chain and saying the settlement is being done on chain. So yes, there are some efficiency gains, but it's not a revolution. Yeah. So now let's step back a moment. Think about what we want to do, at least in my company, at the first place. The DAO has been this extreme example of decentralized governance, no legal entity whatsoever. What is a firm? A firm is just unite a group of people to do something and unite them through contracts towards a joint mission. You get limited liability, which is really useful. And of course, you have the shares or management in contracts or public registry. So in case of the GmbH, it's a public registry in Germany called Handelsregister. In terms of AGs, this is not the case. That's a bit different. It's just contracts. But it's how we do it right now. In terms of governance, of course, the DAO, I today don't believe anymore that the DAO is a good format for product development or for normal for-profit companies. They are already very good for public goods, for maintenance of protocols, for community ownership, and this is what DAOs are great for. A traditional firm is good for product development and finding product market fit. And so how can we now go with these traditional firms? And I'm more talking today about startups. I'm not talking about institutions so much. And still give them this benefit of this tokenization. And I think you would ask, why GmbH? So if I as a founder would go to my lawyer and say, I want to tokenize my company, he most likely will say, you can go to Switzerland, Estonia, Cayman Islands, Bahamas, somewhere else. There are good frameworks there, and you just make a company there and make a German GmbH the daughter company. That's a nice legal setup, works. Many have done this. So I've done this in the US, and well, now this US Delaware Inc. is considered a German company under tax law, and it's just a mess. So as a founder, you do not want to have this hassle of having your management actually in Germany with a company somewhere else. It just brings problems. If I would now tell my lawyer, I want to stay in Germany, it just makes things easier. Then they would say, maybe use an AG. In AG, you don't have the public registry. It's much, much easier. You can tokenize AG shares. That's doable. But now look at the reality. The reality is that most startups in Germany are GmbHs, about 1.15 million, and only 15K AGs. That's just a reality. And it's just because of simple setup, low capital requirements, simple governments, less rules compared to AGs. And the current methods of fundraising in Germany is something I really hate, which is the Wandeldarlehen or convertible note, which is basically a loan you kind of give with a maturity date, an interest, and they are not diluting each other, all those investors investing through a convertible loan. It is, or you do the Kapitalerhöhung, which actually going to the notary, having a lot of costs. It's messy and absolutely not digital. And we want to have a token. So when we looked at this, we didn't look from a legal perspective of what is the easiest way of doing this, going abroad or doing an AG, but what is the reality in Germany in startups? It is GmbH. So how can we solve this? So now looking technically, well, we have this public registry, the Handelsregister. This is kind of layer one, speaking in technical terms, which is only the notary has a permission to write. It's slow, expensive, and not digital. The layer two is like the public Ethereum chain, which the owner of the token has permission to write. It's fast, cheap, and it's programmable. This is, I sometimes like to call Ether programmable money, And this is like something like or similar to programmable equity. And you can do lots of things with it. Vesting contracts for employees, using it as a collateral and DeFi ecosystem to get a loan, all those fun things which you cannot do with normal shares. So that's kind of how I see it. We leave layer 1 as is, create a token on layer 2, which in this case is Ethereum, where you can do all the fun things, fundraising, employee participation, and so on, and always settle in layer 1 as needed. But how do you create a link of a token living there on Ethereum, but having a strong link, at least financially, but also economically as a whole, from your rights, to the actual shares on layer 1, which is in that case the Handelsregister. So if you want to go into the depth of the legal solution, you can scan this QR code. There's a blog post by Markus Kaulatz, who is the inventor of this model. It's called the Auslobungsmodell. And let me briefly explain how this works, not as a lawyer in layman terms. So Auslobung is something which exists since a while, and it's kind of like a public promise an entity, a private person or a company can give, which is legally binding. So I can promise, if you solve this math problem, you get $1 million. If you do this, I have to give you $1 million. If not, you can sue me, because I legally am bound to this promise I made to the public. So in this thinking we use, and the company just announces publicly, or lobt aus in German, that whoever is holding this token is getting this participation rights or Genussrechte. And whoever returns the token to the company is getting the right to convert this token or Genussrecht and get a new emissioned company share. And the rights, pretty simple, it's a Genussrecht, where you get dividends, liquidation proceeds, information rights, and for sending the token back, the right to convert to actual shares. What kind of problem is this solving? If you just do it with investment contracts, you have this problem of having a chain of contracts always being used for transferring the token from investor A, B, C, D, E. But if one of those contracts is for some reason not valid, because my 8-year-old daughter signed it, or I was just not in a state where I could sign such a contract, I did not have the, let's say, authority to do so, then this whole chain of contract falls apart and the token has no rights whatsoever. It would have stayed by the one before the last invalid contract was signed. And this is a problem you have when you want to connect those rights with the token. But in this Auslobungsmodell, there is no contract whatsoever, because the company just promised to the public to reward an action, the action of holding the token or sending the token back. And whoever is doing that action is getting the reward, no matter how he got the token. So this is a CMS, it's our lawyers, Markus Kaulatz, they developed this framework. It cost a lot of money, a lot of time to develop all of this. And now we are using this framework basically to link this token, economically speaking, to the company share. This is how the link is being done. So what do you get in the end? You have a tokenized GmbH. So the best of both worlds. You have programmable shares, token-based ownership, access to DeFi, continuous fundraising, employee participation. You can have an Invest Now button on your website where someone clicks, pays $100 and gets some tokens from your company. This is really nice. And you have the GmbH, meaning you have limited liability, you have a connection to the existing legacy systems like banks, insurance, tax, accounting, and so on. And you have a proven legal entity which works for employment contracts and for all those edge cases. So you have both. You have a token and a normal company. And this is what a lot of founders actually really like to have. So how is fundraising happening? We have two ways of doing fundraising. One is a private offer, where this is done in a smart contract on Ethereum, where you have a fixed recipient, fixed price per token, a fixed amount, expiration date. It's not publicly visible until it's executed. And so you can send your business angels, your investors, your family and friends a link to invest a certain amount of money for a certain amount of tokens. That's from an Aufsichtsrecht or from the BaFin, we use this exception of having less than 150 or 149 invites for investments. For the public offer, technically, I like to call it actually continuous fundraising. In the startup world, we often think about a pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, D. But why are we raising in rounds? Because it is so cumbersome and bureaucratic, and it takes so much time to set up a round and close it. So we do it very discreet. But technically with this, you can have a smart contract where you can always adjust the parameters, like what's the current price, my current market cap, how much do I want to raise, and then have a public offer available as needed. You can pause it if you don't need money. If you think your company valuation has gone up, you increase the price of your offering, and you offer this to the public. So that's how I would like to raise funds as a founder. And the math is very simple. It's just each investment is comparable to a priced round. So you just always issue new tokens, and those tokens are convertible to issued shares. So it's not like those convertible loans which have a terrible math, and when you compare them all, you actually don't know how much you actually are giving away on equity, but here you have a simple priced round. And we can do employee participation in a very new way. We have a vesting smart contract where the employee can get a right to mint a token, depending on how long he's in the company. For example, like a cliff with 1 year and 4 year vesting. And one interesting point is, from a taxation point of view, we have something in Germany called Zuflussprinzip, so you pay tax when you get something. And what we are doing is we are not giving them the token right away. It's an optional thing that they can mint a token, so meaning the token doesn't exist until they mint it. And only when the token comes into existence, they have to pay tax. What is the nice thing about this? They can choose their timing of taxation, avoiding tri-income, which you often have in employee participation programs. That's why we have those ESOPs and FAUSOPs. But the problem is all of this. You have different kinds of assets for those shareholders in the company. You have a founder who is like in the public registry, a Gesellschafter. Then you have an investor who has a convertible loan. Then you have an employee who has an ESOP or FAUSOP. But they all have such a different kind of asset that doesn't make it impossible for a secondary market to exist, because they cannot trade with each other or buy and sell them. With such a token, you get a standardized asset which all of those stakeholders can now own. And actually, the stakeholders can now even be bigger. You can include your community and incentivize early adopters, for example, to use your product using a token. So I'm almost at the end. So when it comes to regulation, so Tokenize, it acts under the liability umbrella of Bitalo, which is a broker license. So we are fulfilling all the requirements such as KYC and AML checks, because we are basically like a broker under this liability umbrella. This is relevant for the public offering. And then depending on the investment offer, we can make use of some of the exceptions used for the prospectus requirements. That is private offers of up to 149 investors. And for those making a public offer, we use the Wertpapierinformationsblatt. So of course, being compliant. That's not the question here. Okay, our mission, to make the last slide, is to enable everyone to become a co-owner of a company. And this easily with a token which is able to be traded on a secondary market, being used for employee participation, and uniting all stakeholders, investors, employees, founders, early users, maybe others, through a token which is standardized. And hopefully we can do this not only in Germany, but across Europe, and get something, sometimes I like to call the Web3-based angel list for Europe, something which doesn't exist yet and we hope to create. Okay, thank you very much.